Hello. This is the Bible in fewer words. We are Carol and Steve Wells. This is episode 282, 1 Corinthians, chapters 7 through 10. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Carol.
Hello, listeners.
Yeah.
Steve and I would like to thank all of our Patreon patrons for supporting us. Thank you very much. In addition to that, we want to thank Martin Watkinson for providing the music at the beginning and the end of our episodes. Thanks, Martin. So, Steve.
Yeah.
We're still with Paul.
Uh-huh.
Paul's reading letters.
Yeah, and this is the 1 Corinthians, the second part of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so Paul is receiving letters from the Corinthians.
Yeah, so he founded a church in Corinth.
Mm-hmm.
He converted them, and then he left. You know, he had other things to do.
Go to convert other people.
Yeah,
okay.
Right. So now he's back. I think he's in Ephesus, and so they are corresponding.
Okay. So he's in Ephesus, which is the place where the Ephesians are?
Yeah. It's in modern-day Turkey.
Okay.
Corinth, of course, is in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got a few hundred miles of the Aegean Sea that separates them.
Okay.
These letters are probably going across by boat across the Aegean Sea. Yeah, so they've been writing back and forth, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been asking Paul questions. The last time Paul was concerned and was telling them about his concerns about how they were not agreeing among themselves. You know, they were saying, who should we agree with? Whose side are we on? Paul's or Apollos or Cephas or whose?
Who's going to be our cult leader?
Yeah,
Really?
right. So they had that going on. And then he also was disturbed by, he'd heard that there were some fornicators among them. He didn't like that. Now we're going to get into some other stuff. Chapter 7.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Chapter 7. Now concerning the things that you wrote to me. So he's going to say now.
He says, for example, it's good for a man not to touch a woman, but to avoid fornication, let every man have a wife and let every woman have a husband. So it's a sort of a yes, but.
Mm-hmm. Husbands and wives should be kind to each other.
The husband has power over his wife's body, and the wife has power over her husband's.
He's being kind of egalitarian there.
Yeah, but I hate to say what he's saying because it's all sexual, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So it's awkward. He's saying that the husband has power over the wife's body
Yeah.
and the wife over the man's body. It's a weird way of putting it.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, but that's what he said.
Okay. To avoid being tempted by Satan, don't deprive your spouse of sex.
I prefer that everyone be like me and not marry.
Mm-hmm. So Paul doesn't have a problem with not having a wife to satisfy his needs.
You know, all these problems with marriage, there's a lot of them. Paul's saying, just don't do it, right?
Don't get married.
I'd rather that none of you get married.
Yeah.
But to avoid temptation, go ahead and do it.
Mm-hmm. If you are a widow or are unmarried, don't get married. Unless you can't control yourself, that is.
Because it's better to marry than to burn.
He says that a lot.
Actually, no, he doesn't. This is a famous line. It's better to marry than to burn, and it's only in this verse, as far as I know.
Okay, so I guess he doesn't say it a lot, but people and priests and other pastors say it a lot.
Yeah, you hear this one sometimes. Better to marry than to burn.
Mm-hmm. Verse 10. But if you're married, stay married. I'm speaking for myself, not for the Lord.
Yeah, so it's not clear here what he means by that. Is he saying that, you know, I'm just kind of...
These are his ideas.
Yeah, I'm just talking. This isn't God speaking, it's me.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know whether that refers just to his little thing about...
right there.
Yeah.
Or everything he says.
Or everything he says in this letter. I don't know. If you have an unbelieving spouse who is willing to stay with you, don't divorce.
The unbelieving spouse is made holy by the believing one.
Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but now they're holy.
That's just bizarre.
Yeah, I don't understand that too much. Somehow the children are made holy by this marriage between a believer and an unbeliever, I guess. I don't know.
But if an unbelieving spouse leaves, let them leave. It's okay to divorce them.
So this is called the Pauline privilege.
Oh.
And it's a thing in canon law in the Catholic Church. It's one of the ways that you can get
Out of marriage.
Out of a marriage, because the marriage wouldn't be a sacramental marriage because you didn't have two baptized people involved.
Mm-hmm. Verse 17. Stay the way you were when you became a Christian. If you were circumcised, don't get uncircumcised.
Yeah, you would think it'd be kind of hard to undo. Yeah. Right? But apparently people must have been trying, I guess.
I know. They had very advanced medical procedures.
I don't know.
Put that foreskin back on there.
Yeah.
If you are uncircumcised, don't get circumcised. Circumcision is nothing. It just doesn't matter. Paul says that.
Yes, he does. So remember when he circumcised Timothy in Acts, in the book of Acts?
Because he didn't want it to look bad.
Didn't want to look bad because he knew that the Jews were watching. And they knew that he was a Gentile who was uncircumcised.
Mm-hmm.
So
Timothy. Yeah.
So he had to circumcise him in order to make his Jewish neighbors
happy. Yes.
But he thinks circumcision just doesn't matter, even though one of the things that you would say about the God of the Hebrew Scriptures.
He cares.
He cares.
A person's circumcised.
Kind of important.
Verse 21. If you were a slave when you became a Christian, stay a slave.
Whatever you were when you became a Christian, that's what you should be.
Really? Like you're stuck there in time? I mean, you can't change?
Yeah.
Verse 25. I have no commandment from God about virgins, but here's what I think about them. All right, Paul, tell us.
It's good for a man to be a virgin. If you're married, stay married. If you're unmarried, don't get married.
It's not a sin to get married. If a virgin gets married, she hasn't sinned.
You'll have trouble in the flesh, but I'll spare you the details.
Paul, for a guy who doesn't like marriage and sex, sure talks about it a lot.
Yeah, he does.
But the end is near, so there's no time for sex. So if you have a wife, don't have sex with her.
Paul definitely thinks that the end is coming right away because there's not even time for sex.
That's correct. But, the reason for marriage is to have sex so that men don't burn in hell. But here he's telling him, don't have sex.
Yeah, it is confusing. I think he's saying that, you remember how he said, I have no commandment from God about this? I'm just kind of riffing here. I'm just saying stuff. So, but he says that because the end is near, just don't have sex. There's no time for that. If you have a wife, don't have sex with her.
Okay, I wonder what Paul's idea of how long it takes to have sex is.
Well.
Just curious.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 32, an unmarried man cares about God and God's things. A married man cares for the things of this world and for his wife.
The same is true for women. So it's okay to get married, but it's better not to. And if you do, don't have sex.
That's
There's
right.
no time. No time for it. Okay, we're done with that. So chapter 7 in 1 Corinthians is all about marriage and sex.
Yeah.
Very important stuff here. And it's something that you will never hear from any Christian.
Nobody talks about it.
No, I don't talk about it. The only thing that you will hear sometimes, especially with regard to Catholic priests, is there's an explanation as to why they are celibate. Because a married man has to be worried about his family and
things of this world.
Things of this world, whereas a celibate man would not have to worry about that. So that's why you will hear a justification for the celibate priesthood among Catholics. But other than that, you're not going to hear people say that, well, Paul says you shouldn't get married, or if you do, you shouldn't have sex.
Okay, chapter 8. Knowledge makes people proud. Love inspires people. Those who think they know something know nothing.
As for eating meat that's been sacrificed to idols, well, either eat the meat or don't eat it. It doesn't matter.
But if you eat it, try not to upset any weaklings that see you eating it. I just can't take it. Don't eat in front of me.
Believers were divided on this, and this was one of the big things. Remember in Acts, they were trying to decide, well, what do the Gentiles have to do? Do they have to get circumcised? Well, no, they don't. They only have to do these 4 things.
Oh, that's
and
right.
one of them is not to eat meat that was sacrificed to idols, I think.
Oh, yes. And another one is not to fornicate.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the other 2 are.
You can't eat blood.
Oh,
strangled animal.
So 3 of them have to do with eating.
Yeah, it's very strange. Anyway, Paul's saying that you might be around some people, some Christians, that were paying attention to what they said at the Council of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And then if you ate meat that was sacrificed to idols,
They'd
that
be
would
freaked
upset
out.
them.
Yeah.
And so don't eat it if somebody's watching that might get upset.
Okay, chapter 9. I'm an apostle. I've seen Jesus. I made you believers. You know, he's such a proud guy.
Yeah. And he's not an apostle. Who am I to say who's an apostle and who isn't? But, Jesus chose 12 apostles.
Yes.
And Paul was not one of them.
No.
Paul had this experience, so he claims.
Yeah.
But how does that make him an apostle?
I don't know.
Well, he thinks it does.
It's written in the law of Moses, don't muzzle an ox that treads the grain. So they're going to feed their ox that's doing work for them.
Yeah, so that is in Deuteronomy, and it's one of the nice things in the book of Deuteronomy, because it shows that God apparently is encouraging people to be kind to their animals, right? Mm-hmm. The animal's working for you.
Yeah.
He's plowing the field. Well, let him have some grain as he's plowing.
Yeah.
The next verse, Paul says, does God care about oxen or about us? About us, obviously. So
how does he get to that?
Well, I think what he's saying in 1 Timothy, of course, Paul didn't write 1 Timothy, but somebody who claimed to be Paul did. And they refer to this, and they say that a worker should be paid. God was really trying to say that we should be paying our employees like you let an ox eat grain while it's plowing for you.
Okay. Verse 20. When I am with Jews, I pretend to be a Jew. When I'm with Gentiles, I ignore the law of Moses. I'm all things to all people, so I can save some of them.
Yeah. So the all things to all people, you hear that a lot.
Yeah.
What is really striking is that when he's with Jews, he pretends to be a Jew.
Yeah, he's a chameleon.
And then when he's with Gentiles, he just ignores all the Jewish stuff,
Yeah.
all the commandments and the laws of Moses. So he can be all things to all people. So that way he can save a few of them.
Uh-huh. So he's not really honest.
No. Well, that doesn't seem honest to me.
No. Chapter 10. Don't be idolaters, as were some of our ancestors who sat down to eat and drink and then rose up to play. What are they talking about there?
Yeah, that's a verse from Exodus. Remember when Moses went up on Mount Sinai to get the 10 Commandments?
It took a long time.
Did.
Yeah.
And then when he was coming down, God told him, hey,
your peeps there aren't behaving.
That's right. And so the way that it's described is they rose up to eat and play. And so what God did then, he and Moses told everyone to kill their friends and family that were worshiping the golden calf.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this big slaughter that went on. Anyway, don't do that, Paul's saying.
Don't fornicate, like some of them did, when God killed 23,000 of them in one day.
Yeah, this is another one of God's famous killings. That was from the book of Numbers, where
people are just fornicating all over the place.
Well, they were having sex, with Moabite women, and that really upset God. And so he sent a plague that killed. Well, Paul says 23,000, but Numbers says 24,000. So there's a little disagreement there on the numbers. Mm-hmm. But he killed thousands of people, and the plague was eventually stopped by a guy named Phinehas, who spared a couple while they were having sex. Mm-hmm. And then, because of that, God stopped the plague.
God was so impressed.
He was.
He said, okay, that's it.
Yeah. One of the great heroes of the Bible is Phinehas.
Oh,
yeah.
really?
Mm-hmm. Well, from God's point of view, yeah.
Huh.
So that's what he's talking about there.
All right, verse 9. Don't tempt Christ, as some of them did, and were killed by serpents. Okay, why does that say Christ?
Yeah, it's very strange, but it does say Christ. Do you remember what this is referring to?
I think so. People didn't have anything to eat, and they were whining.
That's right. So God sent snakes to bite them, and the snakes were biting and killing the people.
Oh, and then this is where the snake on the pole thing. If you looked at it, the serpents wouldn't kill you.
It was a cure for snake bite. Yeah. But the interesting thing here is that Paul is saying, don't tempt Christ as some did. Well, Christ wasn't there at the time, right? This was a long time before Christ was born. Like 1,000 years or so before Christ was born.
Uh-huh.
More than that.
So that's wrong.
Well, no, not according to Paul it isn't, I guess, because Jesus is God. So Jesus was right there with God when God sent the snakes to bite people. So you can blame the snakes, not just on God, but on Jesus too.
I'll do that. Okay, don't murmur, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer.
Yeah, same thing here. This is also a reference to the complaining about the lack of food and water. That's where God sent fire to burn people to death for complaining.
Oh. Why didn't God just feed them?
He did, with the manna from heaven, but they didn't like it very much. That upset them too.
That's the murmuring.
We're sick of all that stuff, this manna. We want to go back where we had some good food in Egypt.
All these things happened as examples to us who are living when the world ends. Verse 16. Isn't the cup that we bless the blood of Christ? Isn't the bread that we break the body of Christ? That's according to Catholics.
Yeah, so Catholics would say, yes, it is. And Protestants would say, no, it isn't. It's just symbolic. And I don't know what Paul might think, because he may think, isn't it the cup of wine, the blood of Christ, and the bread, the body of Christ? He's asking that question like a rhetorical question. The answer would be yes. But would it be a yes? Yes, like a Catholic would be just an absolute yes. And then the Protestant would say it would be a yes, but.
Yeah.
Yes, but not really. It's really symbolic.
Okay, and this whole thing is still a letter that Paul is writing to the Corinthians.
Yeah, apparently he does not like the way people are doing the Lord's Supper or the Catholic Mass.
I'm just having a hard time figuring timeline-wise. They're having Last Suppers?
Oh, yeah, I think so. That's something that Paul definitely knew about. There wasn't much about the life and teachings and sayings of Jesus that Paul knew about, but he knew about the Last Supper. When Jesus says, this is my body and this is my blood, in another one of his letters, he will go through that in some detail.
Okay.
So he clearly knew about that. And he's not happy with the way they're performing this ceremony.
Yeah. Never really thought of that before, that they're having Mass.
Well, I don't think it would be recognizable as Mass. I think Mass was something that the Mass that you're familiar with. I think probably took another few hundred years anyway before it had developed to a point where it would be similar.
Okay.
But they did some type of a ceremony that was in remembrance of the Last Supper and of Jesus at the Last Supper.
Verse 20. But the Gentiles sacrifice to devils, not to God. Don't associate with devils.
You can't drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. You can't eat at the Lord's table and at the devil's. He who sups with the devil must have a long spoon.
Yes. That's a great line.
Yeah. So that, by the way, is not in the Bible.
Where is that, Steve?
The only place I know of it is from the movie Inherit the Wind.
But it must have come from somewhere else.
I'll have to look it up. I don't know.
Okay, verse 23. Everything is lawful to me, but not everything is expedient. Oh, we had this in the last episode.
Yes, we did. Try to make everyone else wealthy, but not yourself.
Eat whatever is sold in stores, asking no questions for your conscience's sake. Were there stores in those days? Like, it's just like...
Yeah, I think so. I think they had Walmart back then.
I guess they had little markets.
Well, let's see what he actually says here. Whatsoever is sold in the shambles, that eat, asking no question for conscience sake.
That is bizarre. You don't want to know what you're eating. There's some lard in there. I can't eat that, sir. Too much salt.
I think the modern equivalent would be store or the marketplace.
Okay, verse 27. Whenever you go to a believer's house, eat whatever is put in front of you.
Asking no question for conscience sake.
Okay, that I get. It's just polite.
That is polite, yeah. But eating anything at the store without question, that's a little bit
bizarre.
But if someone says to you, this was sacrificed to idols,
Don't eat it for his or your conscience sake. Don't offend anyone, not the Jews, Gentiles, or the church. I please everyone in all things. Well, he's got one here that is not pleased with him.
Yeah.
Ha!
So,
Okay, so that's the end of chapter 10. How many more chapters in Corinthians?
6.
Oh. Hopefully you can condense that to
I
something
think we'll
that
be
is
able
not
to get
too
through
long.
it in one episode.
All right. Okay, well, again, thanks, Steve.
Sure.
And listeners, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.